Professor Abhishek from IIT Kanpur have joined. Please confirm. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
So, dear participants, now we have Professor Abhishek from IIT Kanpur. Professor Abhishek is an associate professor at the Department of Aerospace Engineering at IIT Kanpur. He pursued MS and PhD in Aerospace Engineering from University of Maryland, College Park, USA. During the course of his graduation studies, he was awarded with the Vertical Flight Foundation Scholarship and also won the first prize in American Helicopter Society Student Design Competition for designing a high-speed mountain rescue helicopters. He pursued his BTech in Aerospace Engineering from IIT Kharagpur and received the President's Silver Medal and J.C. Ghosh Award for being the best academician in his departments. He awarded IIT Kanpur class of 1979 Research Fellowship in 2017 and Indian National Academy of Engineering, SERB, Science and Engineering Research Board's Abdul Kalam Technology Innovation National Fellowship at the year 2018 for having carried out highly innovative and application-oriented research in the area of unmanned aerial vehicle and wind tunnel. Sir, I welcome you on behalf of all the organizing committee. And dear participant, it is one of the very important and very interesting talk for you. Sir, you please share your presentation. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Rawat, for your kind introduction. Yes, I will share my presentation. Is it visible?
Yes, sir.
All right, fine. Yes, so my name is Abhishek, and today I'm going to talk about the design, simulation, and manufacturing of high-performance unmanned aerial vehicles. So what do I mean by high performance will also become apparent in a moment. This is the overview of my presentation. So I'll start by giving you some background and introduction related to unmanned aerial vehicles, applications, and so on, so that you, although I mean the whole course is actually on this particular topic, but still, no harm in giving you some additional background here. We'll look at how these unmanned aerial vehicles are actually made up of system of systems. So there are different systems, and one has to, so this actually kind of gives a scope for us to explore each of these different systems individually. And since I believe most of the participants are from academic background here, so I thought, I mean, it is the key motivation or the key outline of my presentation should be to sort of get you introduced to different aspects of research that can be conducted in this domain, which is quite varied actually, because this whole domain is very, very multidisciplinary in nature, and there is a lot of scope from people of all kinds of background, people from mechanical, people from aerospace, people from computer science, people from electrical. Everybody has something which they can actually work on and something that they can contribute towards. Well, but nevertheless, I mean, I'll talk more towards the mechanical side of things because that's what my focus is. Although I may touch upon a bit of autonomy part, which of course my colleague Dr. Kothari will be covering in much more detail in the next lecture, which is after my. So we'll talk about design, simulations, experiments, flight testing, manufacturing, different things. I mean, I'll just touch upon various topics, I mean, sporadically. And I'll show you, I mean, like by using some of the techniques and methods which I'm going to discuss in this presentation, what all things can be done. So what all we have been able to develop at IIT Kanpur. So unmanned aerial vehicles, which now, I mean, because they consist of many other systems, so we call it unmanned aerial system. So this unmanned aerial system, as such, is defined as an aircraft without a human pilot on board. And so the aircraft could be remotely controlled. It could be controlled from ground, from another aerial vehicle, from a remote pilot, or an onboard autopilot. So all that definition can be covered in this. So broadly speaking, from the perspective of the way these vehicles fly, the way they generate the lift force which allows it to remain flying in air, we can classify them in these three broad categories. Fixed wing, which is airplane kind, rotary wing, which is helicopter kind, and third is flapping wing, which is the bird kind, inspired from nature. And the kind of techniques I'm going to talk about in the current presentation, I mean, all these techniques apply to all these vehicles. Although, I mean, I focus on the sort of a bridge which connects the fixed wing and the rotary wing world. Yeah. So that is the domain I work in. And therefore, I mean, I have good familiarity with both concepts and both ideas. Applications are infinite, and I will not bore you with these, I mean, because you would be very well familiar with all these applications, which is mostly used as a eye in the sky kind of thing, where you have a camera flying, that gives you real-time information, or it could be some other sensor payload which could be used for all kinds of missions actually. So I will not go into the details, but the bottom line is that, I mean, any mission, any job that can be considered either dull or dirty or dangerous, we can deploy unmanned aerial vehicles for that. So we call it 3Ds. Anything which has 3Ds or any even one of the Ds, you may want to deploy one of the aerial vehicles, unmanned aerial vehicles. So I talked about the three different concepts of fixed wing and rotary wing and flapping wing, and each of these are actually real flight vehicles. There is a very famous Predator drone, Predator or Reaper, I mean, I don't remember. This is a Fire Scout, which is an unmanned helicopter capable of shipboard operations. And the third is actually Hummingbird, I mean, flapping wing aerial vehicle, which is mimicking Hummingbird in some sense. And this is also actually a real flying vehicle developed by Aero Government. So you would be surprised to know that, I mean, just to make two such vehicles, these tiny vehicles like these, Aero Government actually spent $3 million. So that is the level of engineering required to build something like this. So let us look at each of these one by one to give you a broader picture. So, I mean, the old phrase that horses for courses is very much applicable here. So I cannot actually have a unique unmanned aerial vehicle, a UAV or a drone, which will meet all my requirements, which can serve all the purpose. It is not possible. Why? Because each of these actually have certain advantage and certain disadvantage. So in fixed wing aerial vehicle, they are really good when you want to fly for longer durations and longer ranges, because generating lift from wings comes at a lower cost of power.
Abhishek sir, your voice is not audible. Maybe some network issue we have. There is some issue with the system of Dr. Abhishek. He is joining soon.
I don't know why Microsoft decided to crash my Windows. Okay. And,
Now, sir, it's visible and your voice is also very clear, sir.
all right, fine, perfect. Okay. So you just restarted, arbitrarily, the blue screen and restart. Okay. So sorry about that. Okay. So yeah, let's resume. We probably have lost a couple of minutes there. So what I was talking about is that, each of these vehicles have very unique capabilities and unique features. That's why we cannot use any one of them for every mission. So airplanes are good at flying fast and being efficient in forward flight, but they cannot hover. Okay. They always require a runway to take off and land from. Okay. Rotary wing vehicles, helicopter kind of vehicles, the source of lift is the rotor. So all the control, everything comes from the rotor. Okay. So they are very good at hovering, vertical takeoff landing. They are very maneuverable at low speeds, but they have low endurance. Okay. And in forward flight also, you cannot reach speeds which a fixed wing counterpart can actually achieve. So that is another challenge on this side. Okay. Flapping wing, okay, well, this is a sort of a new kid on the block. It's still under a lot of research and development. It will be long before, we can really see it getting deployed. You may have seen in the Uri movie that people are using flapping wing vehicles, but those were actually not the real things. Okay. This technology is very challenging, but it is very exciting and very interesting area to do research on. So someday, yes, it may become a reality. Currently, the bird kind of vehicles cannot be used in practical environments because of scalability issues, lot of mechanical challenges in designing such vehicles. We are not as good as nature as we understand. So, like I mentioned, fixed wings cannot take off and land vertically, and rotary wings cannot fly fast or with good efficiency. So, therefore, there has been a need for design of these hybrid unmanned aerial vehicles. To combine the best from the fixed wing world and the rotary wing world. So somehow bridge the gap between an airplane and a helicopter, and come up with innovative new designs which could be very different, and give you really high performance. And that's why this term high performance, these are called hybrid, aerodynamically hybrid aerial vehicles. So the goal is to have efficient hover and high speed and high endurance flight. That is, even when I fly at high speeds, I should get good endurance. And I should be, the most critical requirement is that, the vehicle should be able to transition between the helicopter mode and the airplane mode. That is, there should not be any problems when I change from hovering flight to forward flight and forward flight back to hovering flight. So that's the need of the hour. And this idea is not very new. People have been trying to do this since 1960s. But then the technology was not mature enough to really get this going. But now it is happening, and there are a lot of designs. I'll show you some of them. The most common hybrid VTOL vehicle design is that of what we call a quad plane. So you take a quad rotor, 4 rotors, and stick it on an existing airplane. And what you have is what is called, one example is RPS jump. In India, also a lot of people are working on this concept, but I don't like this much. Not very efficient, not very scalable, but it has certain advantages, definitely. So it is still very popular, very, very simple to use and easy. Then there are many designs of UAVs which are actually tail sitter. That is, they sit on their tails. Again, this idea is not new. People have been making tail sitter airplanes, manned airplanes, since 1990s and probably even earlier. ETS Zurich worked a lot on that. There is a picture of Raffaello D'Andrea, one of the top researchers in this domain globally, in aerial robotics. He works on very innovative and exciting problems related to control mostly, not so much on design and applications. Another tail sitter design is this is a product actually. This is Martin VBAT, which can take off, land on its tail again, and it tilts by 90 degrees. So all these tail sitters, basically what they do is that you take off vertically and then you try to tilt by 90 degrees, and that's how you do forward flight. Other concepts are tilt rotors. The tilt rotors are, there is a successful design here, which is V-22 Osprey. This is very unique and only type of airplane in all over the world. But there are challenges. And when we scale that down to smaller concepts, it is even harder to make it work very efficiently. But nevertheless, tilt rotors are also there, and they also are a possible design. So these kind of vehicles we call convertiplanes. Then Google had tried with Project Wing long back. This is their old prototype. Now they are working with a new design here, which is more like a jump kind of vehicle. There was another commercially available hobby grade vehicle called Xcraft X+1. Okay. This is same which makes the company which makes phone drones, where you have actually you can stick a phone inside a drone and the phone becomes the autopilot for the drone. And it was meant for iPhone. So I don't know. I mean, how many people would want their drones to be flying with their iPhones? Okay. I won't try that. Okay. So those are some concepts. Then this unique design came from Maryland, where 2 wings were used and 4 propellers were put on that. So this gives you a more compact design, resembles the airplane which Wright brothers invented 120 years back. So this is a biplane, what we call quad rotor biplane tail seater. We call it BITS, and this is a very unique concept, a lot of advantage, a lot of benefits. And at IIT Kanpur also we have done a lot of work on this idea. In this also, again, you take off and then whole vehicle turns by 90 degrees. Then there is tilt wing kind of design where all 4 wings tilt. In the previous case, we saw wings were straight, only the propellers were tilting. Okay. A variant of this could be a quad tilt rotor where you have wings again stationary. So this is a variant of Osprey. We don't do Osprey, which only has 1 wings and 2 propellers, which tilt. Here, 4 propellers. I mean, all the 4 propeller systems are actually tilting. So it becomes a quad plane. Similar hobby toys were also available here. And I even bought one of these actually to see, I mean, how it actually works. This is quad tilt rotor. So these are actually, so we can see there are separate propulsion vehicles like quad plane, where you have separate mechanism for vertical lift and separate mechanism for forward propulsion. While these tail seaters and tilt rotors and converti planes, they try to make use of the same power plant, same propulsion system for both hovering flight as well as the forward flight. So now what happens here in these tilt rotor tilt wing designs, I need to have some actuator which is going to tilt my wing, my propeller, something by 90 degrees. On the other hand, in this design, you don't require, in this tail seater, you don't require any such thing. What happens, my vehicle automatically maneuvers. So this makes this a very clean and neat design. And you saw a picture of this itself in the first slide of this presentation here, which is our design here. Now, I mean, this is a small warning / disclaimer for people getting into this domain. You have to be very careful because DGCA has become very strict. Although, I mean, good news is that just a couple of weeks back, DGCA came out with a new set of regulations, which will make our lives much easier. And it was not very easy. We had to really put up a fight with DGCA to say that, I mean, whatever they had done on 12th of March this year was actually a disaster. And they were, I mean, we are happy that they were actually glad to accept that. So we actually wrote letters to, I mean, signed by 25 faculty from all over the country to Secretary MOCA and Secretary DGCA and everybody to make sure that, I mean, whatever was done on 12th of March was taken back. And that's what happened actually. So it is a good thing. So it is important to ensure that we meet all the compliances that they have set. We never violate that. We take all safety and precautions to ensure that no damage is done ever to anybody. Vehicle may get damaged, no problem. That happens all the time because we are doing research. So when we do research, we don't know what we are doing. And we don't know what we are doing, things are going to break because law of gravity. So these are the classifications. So nano, 250 grams, 250 to 2 kg is micro. Beyond 2 kg is small, and then beyond 25 is medium, 150 larger is large. So we have to be compliant of all this and be aware of that. The reason why, I mean, we are all doing this is not because, I mean, this looks fascinating and exciting. I mean, that is also one of the reasons, I mean, of course, but beyond that, if you look at the whole economics, it is, I mean, amazing. The market in this domain has increased by leaps and bounds, so as to speak. I mean, people were in 2015, just some time back, people were only estimating that, oh, look, this market may become large and all, and suddenly, all of a sudden, I mean, it's several billions worth. Billions of dollars worth. It's already there in America, and in India also same thing is happening. So these are some numbers. So it is expected that by end of, I mean, just recently some articles were also there that Indian drone market, UAV market is going to be worth 1 lakh crores, at least by 2030. And some say it could even be larger. So several lakhs of crores. So now, I mean, that gives you a lot of motivation, right? There's so much money involved. And we being engineers, I mean, our job is to ensure that, I mean, the industry grows because of our efforts. So this is a great domain to get started and get working in this area. Okay, now coming down to what all we can do in this case. So of course, I mean, this course, I mean, gives you a very good overview. I mean, you have already seen a lot of lectures. I mean, and you have probably really good idea, but this is my take here, that what are the things which one can do in this domain. One is, of course, I mean, I can focus on design and development of the platform, because what happens, see, I mean, aviation has been around for so long, right? I mean, airplanes have been flying since 1903. Helicopters have been flying since 1930s. So what is the big deal? I mean, I can take any design of an airplane or any design of a helicopter and simply scale it down to small size by geometric scaling, and I will use that as a UAV. Well, no, it doesn't work like that. Okay. Why? Because the aerodynamics which works at this scale is very, very different. Why is so different? Because of one guy called Reynolds. He invented this number called Reynolds number, which governs the aerodynamics of the vehicles in this category. And that is where the larger airplanes, they operate at Reynolds number, which is of the order of million, 10 to the power 6 and more. So 2 million, 3 million, and so on. But when we come down to this smaller scale, like I'm making a small UAV, small vehicle, which is 1 kilogram, 2 kilogram, even 25 kilogram, my Reynolds number would be only at best of the order of few hundred thousands. If I'm looking at a micro aerial vehicle, the Reynolds number is of the order of tens of thousands. So at these scales, the aerodynamic actually becomes very different. I mean, your lift reduces significantly, drag increases significantly. So your aerodynamic performance drops dramatically. And as a consequence, I cannot do simple scaling. I need to think out of the box, come up with innovative new ideas, new designs to enhance performance of my propellers, my wings, my everything. And therefore, a lot of room for exciting designs. So this could itself be a huge area, and that's what I'm in the area I work in a lot, doing design and development of aerial systems and platforms. So design optimization for specific missions. So whenever we design any aerial system, the user will give you the requirements, and these requirements are in terms of 3 parameters. How much you want to lift, how far you want to carry, and how long you want to fly. So payload, range, and endurance. So payload is, I mean, very simple. I mean, he will tell, okay, I want to fly with this camera, or I want you to carry this box from here to there. So that becomes straightforward. Range could be that, okay, I mean, take it as far as 20 kilometers, 50 kilometers, or whatever. And endurance could be, okay, I mean, I may want to fly for half an hour, 1 hour, or something. Now, normally you cannot specify both of them together. So I will either give range or I will either give endurance. So I don't want to give both. It is impossible to meet both simultaneously. So one, you would actually decide that this is what I want to target. Other will be an outcome that, okay, this is what I end up getting. Anyway, so that is, I mean, nitty-gritty. So customized design, simulation, prototyping, that becomes a one big area where I can do development. The second big domain is actually autonomy. So in autonomy, a lot of things is there. Autopilot development, I mean, simple lower level autonomy, navigation. So basic autonomy is trajectory tracking, trajectory generation, path planning kind of things. Enhanced autonomy, obstacle avoidance, object identification tracking, swarm intelligence, collaborative things, and so on. So, I mean, Dr. Kothari will give you a good, I mean, overview of all these topics. I mean, because that's his domain. We work together a lot. I mean, so he will talk more about that. I will not touch upon this so much. But to achieve these things, whatever all these things are listed here, to be able to do this, you need to know the mechanics of the aerial vehicles very, very well. And that's what I will also focus. Apart from design, what I do is I also do dynamics. I do the dynamics, how I mean aerodynamics and flight dynamics, and even structural mechanics. So I do all that actually for aerial vehicles. How do I model my systems well? So that, I mean, even before I build my aerial vehicle, I should be able to design a controller for that. So control people, they are very good, I mean, to design controllers when you give them set of equations that, look, this is the equation which governs my plant dynamics. If we expect them to develop the plant dynamics on their own, then it will be very hard for them. Unfair also. Because most of them may come from electrical background, they may not know how the aerial vehicle is going to fly. So I do actually that part as well. And Dr. Kothari has also now, I mean, picked up a lot. I mean, and he himself is doing a lot of dynamics and flight dynamics together. So that actually also is a sort of a bridge between design and autonomy, where we design or we develop the flight dynamics model, and I'll touch upon that also. Other related studies could be, like I mentioned, aerodynamics of low Reynolds number, how I improve performance of my propeller, of my wing for a small aerial vehicle, come up with more innovative high performance aerodynamic designs, completely out of the box designs, which nobody has explored. Explore fabrication techniques. How I can ensure that I get very high strength with very, very light structures. Come up with innovative designs to make structural members. Explore new materials, innovative new materials which would be easy to fabricate and manufacture and is fine for the kind of low loads that we look at for smaller aerial vehicles and lower factor of safety. And of course, manufacturing technique. How I can do scale production, large scale production, and efficient and cost effective production at for these vehicles with smaller inputs. So that brings me to the first topic, that is design of the UAV or unmanned aerial system. Now, this design actually is a multidisciplinary design optimization exercise, because here, a lot of challenges are there, a lot of things are there, and some of this will become clear. I'll give you some background and detail on this. So, a lot of optimization methods are also used to solve design problems and incorporating number of different disciplines. So, what happens if I want to optimize the design of my unmanned aerial vehicle? I have to see how I can maximize the aerodynamic performance, minimize the structural weight without compromising on the safety aspects. Number 3, and ensure that my design meets the specified performance criteria in terms of range, endurance, payload, everything. So all these different disciplines, different ideas, structures, aerodynamics, flight mechanics, all has to come together to get this design going and ensure that we can design and the most optimal solution. So that is MDO. So objective, like I mentioned, is specified in terms of payload, endurance, range, etc. Now configuration selection becomes very, very important here, because I mentioned that I showed you so many different VTOL designs. If I start showing you helicopter designs and airplane designs, there are so many choices. How do I decide which particular configuration I should go with, and how do I know it is going to meet the requirements? So that's where a lot of experience comes into play, familiarity with the system, because that would allow you to judge and decide which configuration may work better. So you may go and do a lot of background study to find out, okay, what is the pro and con of each configuration and which one looks more likely to meet your mission requirements. So yeah, so configuration selection has to be specific to the mission requirements. So based on my mission requirements, once my user tells me this is the mission I want to fly, I will have to choose what. So if it is a long distance travel mission and I have runway available, I will go with a fixed wing. But if it is a hovering mission where I have to stay at one place and do surveillance for a long time, I'll go with a helicopter. Even though a lot of people will go for a quadrotor, but I know helicopter will beat a quadrotor hands down at any point of time in terms of performance and everything. So now the fundamental question is that fine, okay, MDO and all those things are fine. Okay, but how do we really design an unmanned aerial vehicle? What are the steps involved in this? And a lot of times, when I discuss with my students and I tell them that, okay, so a lot of guys come for me for internship or summer projects and all, I tell them, okay, we are going to work on a design of a aerial vehicle. So they think, oh, design means, okay, I have to make a CAD drawing. So this CAD drawing, which is representative of a biplane tail seater, this is my design. So then I have to educate them, no, this is not actually a design. This is not a design. CAD is not a design. And design is actually culmination of my entire knowledge of this, all the systems of, and everything I learn in aerospace engineering or mechanical or whatever trade you are doing, depending on the design of your particular trade. Another most important fact is design is an iterative process. I cannot do design, in one go. It has to be iterative because there are too many unknowns and very little information is available. And there is no unique solution also. Same performance can be made by hundreds of different designs. Unlimited number of designs, in fact, that's what to speak. So no unique solution. And there are infinite choices. So that actually makes the task of the designer, very, very challenging. How is he going to make certain selections? Also, a certain amount of empiricism is still involved. That is some past experience, some statistical information, some experimental information is needed. And you cannot actually design everything from physics alone. Some experience and some empirical things are actually required. And design has to be optimal. In terms of what? The key goal to design anything any aerial vehicle is to minimize its weight. If I can minimize the weight, I can ensure maximum performance. So that is always the requirement. So objective is to meet the requirements, but in that process, ensure that my gross takeoff weight is smallest. So I will have to explore a lot of design choices to see that which design choice gives me the lowest possible weight. It's not easy question to answer, but I'm just trying to give you an overview of things. So we have to ensure mission requirements are met. I should be able to lift enough payload. You should have required endurance, range, etc., and so on. Other constraints are.
Sir, one question is from my side. If you kindly.
Please, sure.
Sir, if we change, of course, it's the one important thing we have to reduce the load. But sir, aerodynamics will also be the affected. We should not focus also on the aerodynamics structure.
Of course, it is part of the whole thing. Yeah.
Okay, sir. So both the things we have to take care at simultaneously.
I'm actually going to come to that. Yeah, that's why I said, the entire knowledge of aerospace engineering, right? Yeah. So entire knowledge means aerodynamics, structural mechanics, flight mechanics, and even propulsion. But propulsion, we don't include in the design process. It's mostly selection. Once I know everything, I will select a power plant based in the available. Okay. So that's why everything is required. Yes. So good point. Okay. So at the beginning, I said that UAV or unmanned aerial system is a system of systems. So aerodynamic systems, I'm not mentioning because aerodynamic system is functionally it is actually a structural system also. Okay, because a wing is a structure which actually gives you aerodynamic force. So I did not mention that separately. So structural system, wings, rotors, propellers, fuselage, and support structures, transmission systems, mechanical transmission, could be electrical transmission, control surfaces, how you maneuver the vehicle. So all those things are part of this. Okay. Now, propulsion system is either you have motors if you are electrical vehicle. Okay, motors. If you are, you have a engine-based system, then it could be 2-stroke engine, 4-stroke engine, Wankel engine, gas turbine engine, jet engine, okay, whatever you may want. Okay. So electric side, you have now source of power could be battery solar combination, or hybrid where I have a generator on board. So this is a sort of a propulsion hybrid, okay, not the aerodynamic hybrid which we were talking earlier. And then avionic systems, because finally all these vehicles have to fly on their own. They require a lot of onboard systems for autonomy, for communication, to transmit information, whatever they are gathering to the base station, and so on. So these are the different systems. So that's actually now when we're designing, I have to worry about each of these actually, right? And you can see each of these come from very different domains. Not beyond one person to actually be able to expert in each of these domains. But familiarity with all these is actually very, very important. So we must be aware of what is there, because if you don't know what kind of engines exist in the market, you may be a very good control designer, but when you try to design a UAV, you will not know what power plant to choose and what power plant to put. So some more details regarding fuel engine could be 2 4-stroke reciprocating engines, gas turbine engines, Wankel. Wankel is a rotary engine, which is also a internal combustion engine. It's very popular due to its low vibration for UAVs, but it is very expensive also, mostly used for larger UAVs. Small UAVs, it's too expensive to be used. Fuel cells is coming in a big way for future propulsion, but very expensive right now. Availability, reliability is questionable right now. Therefore, it's not very popular and not getting used so much. Lithium polymer batteries and lithium ion batteries are the common workhorses right now for all UAVs. And lithium sulfur batteries are coming up, which could be a game changer in coming times, but it's still something in the development phase. And finally, hybrid systems where you have fuel plus electrical systems together. And so you have a generator on board which will generate power for you. To give you an idea of how complex this small UAV could look like, I just taken a picture of one of our old works from 2012-13 kind of time. We made this small coaxial rotor helicopter which could fly and do position hold and some stuff like that. So just to give you an idea, there are so many different things. See, this is control. So this is your. So this is. The airframe could be simply this box which is here. Then there are so many avionic systems. A lot of electronics, autopilot is there. Electronic speed controller is there. The mechanical components, the servos are there. Such as this swash plate assembly, which changes the pitch angle of the blades of these propellers. There are 2 sets of blades. Then there is something called a fly bar, which tries to mechanically stabilize it. There are gears also here, plastic gears, which allows you to use your motors more efficiently, because motor may spin at very high RPM. while the propeller spins at lower RPM. So a lower torque motor can also be used to power larger rotors. Because what happens, the weight of the motor scales up with the torque it is actually transferring. So and these larger rotors actually are very torque intensive. They require high torques. So my motor may become very heavy. So that is why distributed propulsion actually is a good way forward, because then you have a smaller units, and each of them have lower torque requirements, and then you can easily use smaller motors there. So all that what is you see here actually this big mess which looks like a lot of wires coming here and there. Experimental vehicles are like that. All actually it becomes more clearer here, like how the things are being connected and what is happening here. So like I mentioned, it's a very old thing from 2012, 13 sometime. I think 2012 summer actually. So almost 9 years old. That's when we work with this Arduino Uno and all. Now nobody looks at them actually. They are okay for robotics, not for UAVs so much. So this is how the connectivity is. On board you have a microcontroller which is talking to servos, talking to the motors. So all the actuators which it controls through PWM signals. You have inertial measurement units, optic flow sensors, or whatever sensors you have on board, IR sensor, etc., which is giving data through different communication protocols to the microcontroller. All this data is sent to the computer through some telemetry system. It could be Zigbee, it could be RFD900, whatever, or a Wi-Fi module. Then there is a pilot control also available through the receiver module, and all that actually comes to the microcontroller. And microcontroller takes pilot inputs and decides on its own what is to be done, and commands all the vehicles to do the action, whatever is supposed to do. So this gives you an idea how the things get connected and finally gets assembled in the form of this kind of helicopter. So you can see here it is a coaxial helicopter, and everything is put up here, and various sensors are integrated into the sensor. And UAV autopilots normally have this kind of the common processor being used is actually ARM Cortex M4 based processor, ST. So this STM32 is a very popular autopilot hardware used across almost all autopilots in industrial grade at least. So nowadays your autopilot. So last 9 years you can see I have gone through these 3 different autopilots, actually 4 different autopilots, and even 5th one, because now Pixar Cube gets used mostly. I have not put the picture of that. So this technology actually is evolving very, very fast. A lot of things are changing very quickly, and therefore one has to keep pace with this. You have to keep yourself updated. You have to keep updating your hardware. Otherwise, it becomes obsolete in no time. So that's the agility of this whole thing. It's very, very happening thing. So that brings me now back to the original question of design. So now you saw that it's the whole thing is very complicated. There are so many different things on board, and how I design this and how I select many things becomes challenging. The most fundamental question could be that how big my propeller could be, how big my motor should be, how big my battery should be. How do I find all these things out? What is the way to solve this quandary for us, right? So starting point for all this is that this is what I know to begin with. The user has come and told me, I want a particular UAV which can lift this X payload, and it has this X flight time and this Y travel distance. That's all. So with this, I will actually start the design process. Oops, sorry, I went in the wrong direction. So based on this, I will actually, what I will do is that I will first hunt existing UAVs in the market and see whether there is a solution which comes close to my current requirements. Because what happens, if there is already an existing solution, the user has not come to you. They would never come to you, right? Because they can simply buy it from there. Or maybe for some reason they cannot buy it, so they may still come. But nevertheless, there would be something existing which may be close to meet some of the mission requirements. So that will give you some initial idea, initial input regarding what configuration I'm going to use, what size of rotor I have to use, what will be the propeller diameter, how many rotors are going to be there in that, what is the wing geometry, wing size, span, etc. So it will give you some idea. So that some idea is very, very important. So from that, I will actually come to this initial gauge weight. This is the most important, this is one very important step. I would say not the most important step, but it's one very important step. Why? Because to start the whole calculation process, I have to make a guess. Otherwise, I cannot get started. So this guess could be based on what is existing in the market or a simple rule of thumb. So for example, for quad rotor kind of vehicles, for VTOL kind of vehicles, I can actually, if I know my payload, okay, so if my payload is 100 grams, okay, I can say that the quad rotor which I will design, optimized design, the weight of the entire vehicle would be almost 3 times of my payload. Okay. So this becomes payload fraction. That is ratio of my payload weight divided by the total weight of the vehicle, which is initial guess weight, which we are calling it is gross takeoff weight, GTOW, as we call it. So this gross takeoff weight actually now has to be guessed based on my payload. So if I don't have any other information, I'll simply say, okay, I have to leave 100 grams of payload. My initial guess weight will be 300 grams. If it is 1 kilogram, I will say my vehicle initial guess weight is 3 kilograms. For a quad rotor kind of vehicle or a multi-rotor kind of vehicle. For a helicopter kind of vehicle, it could be slightly more aggressive. That is, the payload fraction could be as high as 0.4. So I'll say for 1 kilogram, my helicopter weight would be 2.5 kilograms, not 3 kilograms like multi-rotor. But if I'm doing a hybrid vehicle, which has propellers also, wings also, so there, I mean, empty weight increases because you have extra structure and extra things which you are trying to get for a better performance. So there, I mean, payload fraction will be bad. So there, I mean, for 1 kilogram, I'll assume it would be 4 kilograms. So for multi-rotors, 1 kilogram to 3 kilogram, that is 1 kilogram payload can be lifted by a 3 kilogram vehicle, loosely speaking. Helicopters, 1 kilogram vehicle will be lifted by 2.5 kilogram UAV. And for hybrid, 1 kilogram is lifted by 4 kilogram vehicle. So that is the rough, guess. Now, after I've made this guess, then now the real fun starts. First step is to do power calculation. And this power calculation requires knowledge of aerodynamics. Because without knowing aerodynamics of my propellers, of my rotors, of my wing, I cannot do this. So I'll in coming slides, I'll come to that. I mean, how we do this power calculation. But let's say now I've done power calculation. I have some tools by which I can actually estimate how much power my vehicle is going to require. After power calculation, the outputs that you will be available with would be the power required, the torque required for the individual motors or rotors. From this, you may be also able to derive parameters for RPM. Okay, that is what should be the motor speed to generate a particular amount of thrust. Okay. So this can be again done with based on the propeller characteristic or rotor characteristic and so on. Now, once I have this three information, rotor, power, torque, and RPM, I'll then start estimating the specifications for my power plant in terms of how much current my motor is going to draw, what kind of voltage I should have in terms of my battery, what number of cells I should choose for my battery. So, and the capacity of the battery, because I want to see how long I'm going to fly. So for that, how much energy I should actually have on board. So energy capacity, your current that the motor will draw, the kV of the motor. Okay. So all these brushless DC motors actually come with kV ratings, which, I mean, if time permits, I'll explain. Otherwise, it's not very critical. Okay, you can search online here. Yeah. So all this information can be derived from this knowledge. And based on this, now what I will do is that once now I have power requirement known, current requirement, voltage requirement, kV, RPM, all those things are known, I can actually do estimation of weight for each component that is going into my UAV. So I will be able to estimate rotor, power plant, your powertrain, that is ESCs, electronic speed controllers, airframe weight, wiring weight, avionics weight, all these weights I'll have to now estimate. How do we estimate? I'll give you an example of that. But there are formulas for this. There are empirical formulas which are available already here, which one can use to estimate the weight. Now, all this weight estimate is done. I'll add all the weight for each component and check whether it is close or equal to the initial guess weight. If it is not, if it is significantly different, then I will whatever new weight I have gotten by adding all these numbers, I'll use that weight. So I'll replace this initial guess weight with this new weight information, and I'll just redo this whole calculation. So this closed loop you see is what I was talking about, iteration. So I have to iterate, keep iterating till I see that yes, my guess weight, once my guess weight and the final weight come very close, okay, within a given tolerance. Like if I am designing a 4 kg UAV, I expect the final weight to be 4 kilograms, okay, and my initial guess is 4 kilograms, and the final answer comes to be 3.95 kilograms. I will say, okay, good, I have converged. Okay. But if my answer comes 3.5 kilograms, then I keep redoing this. Okay. And then I convert this. It works perfectly fine. I mean, we do this all the time. So with this, what happens? I actually end up getting one design. This is not the design, not my final design. This is one design because I have made a lot of choices here. I selected some number of propeller, some number of rotor. I selected some dimension for the rotor. I don't know how good they are. So then I will start varying each of these parameters one by one. And when I do that, I will generate, hundreds of designs. And out of these hundreds of designs, finally you have to see which design gives you the lowest weight. And how accurately this whole thing works is somewhat dependent on how accurately you estimate the power and how accurately you estimate the weights. Weight estimation is slightly tricky because it's mostly statistical, it's empirical formula. But power calculation can be made very, very accurately with really good accuracy. So now this is in a nutshell the whole process for design. Now we'll go into some more detail of this. So the requirement is power calculation. Okay, how do I do that? Okay. So performance can be done for hover, forward flight, both. And the techniques used are what we call blade element momentum theory, very popular and widely used fast method. Accurate method could be CFD or experimentation, but both CFD and experimentation will be expensive in terms of time and money both. And I cannot do optimization using CFD. Okay, because CFD is actually a very, very slow process, so it will take a lot of time. And we need accurate weight estimation formulas. I'll give you some sample of that in the coming slides. So now, fundamental question, okay, how do I get the performance? Okay, how do I get the power correctly? Okay. So the simplest approach is momentum theory, okay, where you assume the disk rotor to be a disk or actuator, okay, and that gives you power in terms of the thrust the rotor is generating, simply as this. Okay. So you can look at this, is available in all textbooks. I will not go in details. Power equal to, so I'm trying to focus more on things which is not readily available in textbooks. Okay. So power is simply thrust to the power 3 by 2 divided by square root of 2 rho A. Rho is density, A is the area of the disk. Okay. Very simple formula. So, I mean, if you look at a quad rotor of 4 kilogram, 4 kilogram quad rotor, each rotor must generate 1 kilogram of thrust, okay, to make it fly. So thrust becomes 1 kilogram. Okay. And disk area, you can see what should be the propeller size, that would be good. And based on that, I can get a power. But this is ideal power. This is very, very idealistic, and it will give you underestimate value. So I cannot rely on this fully. This is okay to get some ballpark idea, get some rough estimate, but not quite for, reliably using it. Okay. So the next step in the process of evolution is blade element momentum theory. And this is where, so BEMT stands for blade element momentum theory. Here, things become more accurate. It's also called strip theory. I take my blade or propeller and strip it into small segments, which we call elements or blade elements. So if I look at this, one of these elements, it will look like this. So this element is actually, so this whole propeller is spinning, and therefore your rotor will be generating some thrust, okay, or lift. And this airfoil in itself, okay, because it is being spun, there is tangential velocity because of rotation. So ut will be omega into r. The perpendicular velocity is what the rotor is inducing to generate the thrust, which we call inflow or induced velocity. And the corresponding angle phi we call induced angle of attack. So now total angle is the angle at which the blade is pitched. So this is called the blade pitch. The propellers also have some pitch. So this pitch is sum of angle of attack and the induced angle of attack phi. So you can see angle of attack alpha will be theta minus phi. Theta is geometric angle, which we know. Phi is what we need to calculate based on the inflow, which we don't know right now. So now based on the same diagram, I can write this induced angle of attack or inflow angle as tan inverse of perpendicular component by tangential component. And I can describe or define lift as half rho v square c CL into dy. So this is lift from the element, okay, only one small segment. And lift and drag are actually at slight incline. I actually want to know the vertical force because that is my thrust or lift which is supporting my weight. So that actually comes out by doing this simple transformation. And NB is the number of blades. So this is for one element for one blade. So this becomes now thrust, elemental thrust or infinitesimal thrust and infinitesimal torque for all the blades put together. But this is only infinitesimal. To get it for the full rotor, okay, I will have to integrate it over the entire length of the blade. Okay. So I have to integrate from 0 to r. Okay. Or in non-dimensional terms, I can do it from 0 to 1. If I divide by radius r to non-dimensionalize everything. So by integrating these two expressions, I can actually get the total thrust and total torque. And torque multiplied with my angular velocity omega will give me the power. So that means that is what I want. I want the thrust and I want the power. These are the two things which I require for my design exercise. But still there is one unknown left here, which is this induced inflow, this phi, or what we called earlier lambda also. So this lambda, phi equal to lambda by r, where r is the radial location, non-dimensional radial location. So now, I mean, how do I get this inflow? That is where the blade element momentum theory comes into picture. So what we do is that, I mean, in the beginning you saw this momentum theory, okay, where we have actuator disk. Actuator disk theory is very, very old. It was developed for marine propellers. Nothing new in that. Okay. Some of you may be already familiar with that. And so what somebody did actually, it was Glott, who took this momentum and actuator disk model from almost what, I mean, 150 years back, right? So it's that old, you can see. So this theory somebody took and they said, I mean, I have this blade element theory. Why don't I equate this non-dimensional thrust, or sorry, the thrust for an annulus, which I get from the blade element theory, and what I get from the momentum theory. So by equating that, they got some. So this is a model. Okay? There is no physical basis of doing this. Just a model, but it works very well. So they said, okay, I'll equate these two formulas, okay, and from these two formulas, okay, I'll get an equation which I can solve to get my inflow. Okay, so it gives you a equation in a quadratic equation in lambda, and I solve for lambda and I get this. Now lambda is known. I can go back. I can now put lambda here, okay, and I can get my alpha, and I can complete this integration and get the thrust and torque. Okay. So that is in a nutshell blade element momentum theory. Again, all this is there in the textbooks. I just gave you a quick introduction to give you some idea once you get started in this case. So this will allow me to predict the performance of any propeller very, very accurately. I'll show you some example also. Now here, I mean, there is a choice. Yes, yeah. This CL alpha that we see in this formula, and yes, there are a lot of symbols which I did not explain. I don't have time to explain each and everything. But the CL alpha is the coefficient of lift for an airfoil. It's the slope of this graph of CL versus angle of attack. So what is CL? CL is lift coefficient. I hope you know this. Otherwise, you go and learn about this. Yeah. So in this graph, you see that there are different graphs for 4 different airfoils. Okay, NACA 0010, S1223, and so on. And you see all of them have different CL alpha, and they have all different behavior. They all stall after some point. So if I use this CL alpha into alpha as a constant lift coefficient, okay, so this is CL alpha is obtained using alpha tables or CL alpha into alpha. So this is simple thing. Okay. I mean, I make assumption that my angle of attack is always small, so I'm always in the linear regime and I am fine. So that is okay for some calculation, but if you expect that, I mean, your rotor is heavily loaded and it may go close to a point where your lift starts dropping, then you should use the full table. Okay. You should use the full curve. So you can even come up with a formula which, or a curve fit on this as a function of alpha and use this here. That is another approach. Likewise for drag is, you see, it's for symmetric airfoils and some airfoils is very constant for small angles of attack. A lot of times we use constant drag. Otherwise, you can use drag polar also, drag table. Okay. So this actually has some good point, and the advantage of that is that if I use linear CL alpha into alpha, then you see my thrust keeps on increasing with angle of attack, with my pitch angle. It will keep going to infinity, which is not real. But if I use the lookup table with a stall or this airfoil curve fit, then you see my thrust will start dropping after a point because my blades are going to stall. So that's the advantage. So this, if you have a table lookup in the BEMT, it is really, really good. So then you get really good accurate performance. And here is a demonstration of that. So the symbols are experimental data and lines are your prediction using a BEMT theory with a lookup table in that. Okay. And we see really good match there, quite satisfactory match, even for a single rotor and even for coaxial rotor. So this is the perfect tool. Okay. Some open source softwares are also available, but developing a software of this kind will require you 2 days, okay, 2 to 3 days, nothing more than that. If you know MATLAB, you can code this up in 2 to 3 days time. All right, so that brings me to the design part, okay, like exactly how do we do the estimation of weights and everything. So I gave you a rough overview and block diagram earlier. Okay, now here is a more detailed block diagram, which actually takes the example of designing a multi-rotor. Okay. So a multi-rotor or quad rotor can be designed using this algorithm. This algorithm is available in paper by Winslow, Hrishikesh and Chopra, okay, who are from University of Maryland. Okay. 2017 paper, which gives you really nice way to design small multi-rotor drones in optimal manner. And more importantly, it explains to you the whole design process, how it should be done. So again, you see here, starting point is flight time. Okay. Or mission requirement, basically. Okay, mission requirement. So flight time and payload. There are 2 key mission requirements given. Gross takeoff weight, you are going to guess the way I told you. Okay, 3 times of your initial weight. Then other important parameters are radius. Sigma is solidity, which is non-dimensional parameter, ratio of the blade area divided by the disk area. And NB is number of blades in a propeller or in a rotor. Number of cells is for the battery. So now these choices have to be made initially. You have to decide some radius R based on your prior information. A number of blades you have to decide. Chord you have to decide for the propeller. So that will fix all these parameters. Gross takeoff weight you have guessed. Now using all this, what you will do? You will calculate thrust, power, and torque using BEMT or some similar technique which will give you accurate estimate of power. Now from power, now I know how many cells of battery I have used, so I know what is the voltage that is available. So in lithium polymer batteries, what happens? I mean, one cell is 3.7 volt, 2 cell is 7.4 volt, nominal. Okay. So now if I am using a 3-cell battery, whatever my power is, power divided by the battery voltage will give me the current, maximum current. But there is a catch. Okay. I will not use that particular current. I have to find out what is the maximum current that my motor would ever require. How do I find that? So for that, again, there is a thumb rule. Okay. So, I mean, like I said, I take an example of 4 kilogram quad rotor. Okay. Each rotor is generating 1 kilogram thrust. Okay. Now, but that is for the hovering flight, right? If I have to maneuver, okay, if I have to fly in windy conditions, if I have to maintain position in windy conditions, you have to lift more weight sometimes. Okay. My power required may increase. So my motor has to be rated for higher thrust and higher power. So this rating is actually taken as the scenario where you end up generating twice of the hovering thrust. So you take 2T, so use twice of thrust requirement in the BEMT code and calculate the power required for that. So that becomes maximum power that you anticipate the system to encounter ever in the operational life cycle. So with this max power, I will try to find out max current. And this max current then will be used to size the motors. So my motors will be rated for this maximum current, okay, and maximum power accordingly. Okay. But we will not use this current and this power to calculate my endurance, because my endurance will depend on my hovering thrust and hovering power. So this gives my Imax, and then there are formulas which will allow me to calculate battery weight, motor weight, ESC weight, and airframe weight. All those things can be calculated, and everything will be added, and you check whether my takeoff weight actually is in the correct ballpark or not. Okay. If it is, then I mean, I say, yes, I have solved, I have got a design and I'll exit. So let's quickly see this. So like I said, we take power from BMP and initial. So this is some explanation on the same thing. Okay. So my current is power by voltage, and motor size based on the highest current expected, which is twice of gross take-off weight I use to get the maximum current, which I call Imax. And all weight estimates for all components is done using empirical formulas obtained using regression fit on available data for existing systems. So how it is done? Well, I mean, in this case, they took their real pains to buy so many motors from the market. So here you see rotor weight. So they bought a lot of propellers and rotors which are available in the market and did a regression fit on that. Okay. And then the formula that they got, this is the comparison of the formula with the actual weight. So this straight line, you see, I mean, they are very close, okay, to the regression fit. In this, they assume that the mass of the rotor is function of the radius, function of number of blades, and function of solidity, which basically is chord, okay, in this case. So that way, I mean, you get the mass of the rotor. So now, I mean, if I know the radius which I have guessed, the solidity I have guessed, number of blades I have chosen, I will be able to estimate my mass of the rotor using this formula. Battery weight, I know what is the number of cells I have here, and what is the C rating of the motor here. So C is the battery capacity in milliampere hour. So all these batteries, they are sold in 2000 mAh or 5000 mAh and so on and so forth. And S is the number of cells. So number of cells and this C rating will give you the weight. And here is the regression fit on the battery, and you see it matches very well here. So this formula will give you good estimate of battery weight. Now, what is this mAh business? These batteries have this rating, weird rating. The mAh, what is this mAh? Okay. How do you, because it's supposed to tell you the power, okay, or the energy content. So to convert mAh to watts, you have to multiply it with, because it's milli, so 10 to the minus 3 into the S, that is number of cells, 3.7. So this gives you the voltage. S into 3.7 gives you voltage. And it's milliampere, right? So 10 to the power minus 3 and hour. So 1 hour has 3600 seconds. So multiply with 3600 and whatever mAh rating, or I should have put C here actually. Okay, so instead of mAh, I should have put C. Yeah. So this 0.001 into S into 3.7 into 3600 into C will give you the power output of the battery in watts, okay, which can be used for other calculations. Okay. So what is this power and C rating? What is the meaning of the C rating? Okay. So there is, so these batteries are rated for 10C, 20C, 40C, and so on. So what it means is that the time it takes to discharge this entire battery. So if time of discharge is 5 hours for the this current rating, the C rating for the battery will be 1 by 5. If I can discharge this entire battery in 1 by 5 hour, okay. 1 by 5 hour means your 12 minutes. Okay. If I discharge in 12 minutes, then the C rating is 5. So delivering power at a rate that will discharge battery in 5 hours, and here delivering power at a rate that will discharge battery in 1.5 hours. So it basically tells you what current you are drawing, okay, at any given point of time. So higher C rating means battery is capable of delivering higher current discharge. Okay. So the same thing here, okay, some more detail. So current and the C rating. So current that will discharge the 1/5 capacity in an hour. So if the time of discharge is 5 hours, C rating is 1 by 5, and current is also 1 by 5 C. Okay. Likewise, current is 5 times C. And hence the battery says 5C, 10C, and so on and so forth. Okay. So that's the rough idea about this C rating of the motor. So high C rating means high power and high current delivering capability. So the battery will be able to successfully deliver higher values of current. All right, coming back to motor parameter. Okay. So the motor weight has to be estimated, okay, because we saw the propeller weight, we saw the motor battery weight. We have to see what should be the weight of the motor itself. So that is determined based on the kV. Unit kV simply is RPM by battery voltage. Okay. But now these GLDC motors, these brushless DC motors, their RPM is not a function of their voltage, because it has a driver which drives and determines the RPM. So the definition of kV for such motors is that it is the back EMF or voltage that motor would generate when it is spun with the RPM equal to the kV. So say motor has a kV of 2300 here. So if I take this motor, so this motor is 2300 kV, I take this motor, I spin, I hold it stationary and spin the shaft at 2300 RPM and try to measure the voltage across its terminals, you will see 1 volt. Okay. So that is the definition of, so it basically tells you the back EMF, okay, or sort of the loss which this motor actually going to have. So motor weight for being this motor scales with the peak power, okay, which is torque into speed, and peak current and kV, because power is after all function of torque. So based on that, I mean, there is a formula here which is given here, and again they did some curve fitting, took data for many motors available in the market, and they came up with this long formula which has kV, power, and 2 other parameters, which is geometry of the motor, that is motor casing length, how big the casing is, and diameter. So motors are all cylindrical, you can see, right? So the length of the casing and the diameter of the casing. These are 2 parameters also which affect the weight. So based on that, I mean, you can get mass in grams. And in this, the formula is actually Imax, which is based on the 2 times the hovering thrust requirement. Okay. So with this formula, I can get the motor weight now. Similarly, I can get the airframe weight based on the radius and the mass of the battery. Okay. So based on these 2, they found that okay, the radius, the weight of the whole airframe can be determined, and you can use that. And so by that, I mean, now you have the mass of all the components. I think there was a ESC also. Did I miss? ESC mass is already here. Okay. ESC mass in grams is the formula of the maximum current again. So using all this, I can get the whole total mass of all the components. I add everything up, and that gives me total mass. Now I'll check and iterate. So that's the whole process. And in this paper, they actually try to compare the same approach for existing designs like DJI Phantom, other existing commercial drones like Syma X5, brushless, Syma X8 brushless, and brushed motors also. And they found that the errors are fairly small, of the order of 10%, which is a very good accuracy in most cases. Yeah. So percent error is 10 to 15% for some cases. Yeah. But the more important thing is the total. Okay. I mean, individual component weights may differ, but if I look at the total gross takeoff weight, the error in gross takeoff weight is less than 5%, which is amazing, because that is very, very important for me. Okay. So that's the whole process, how you design a multi-rotor. Now, if I have a hybrid vehicle, I will add the formula for weight of the wing. I'll also add the formula for power required in forward flight, power required in hovering flight. So it becomes slightly more complicated, but all those things are relatively straightforward. Yeah. So I have not included here for the paucity of time. So that brings me to the sort of second leg of my talk, which is a brief one on modeling and simulation, and then I will talk about the manufacturing aspects. I mean, how you do the manufacturing. Okay. So we already saw, I mean, that there is a good bit of simulation involved in the design process. Okay. We have to write a code. We have to write so many formulas which can estimate weights. We have to write a good simulation which can predict my power very accurately using blade element momentum theory and other simple approaches. So already there is good amount of simulation required for design, and also to verify certain things, I may have to do some CFD calculation to optimize my structural weight and ensure that my structural weight estimates are right. When I do detailed design, I have to do some finite element calculation. So a lot of simulation has to be done as well on the UAVs. But when we come to the simulation part, beyond this, there is other flight dynamic simulation, right, which is required for the autonomy part. There is a lot of scope. So that kind of so in flight dynamic, I mean, now I want to know how the vehicle is going to behave for a given set of input. So if I excite my vehicle by giving some control input, how is it going to respond? Okay, that becomes very, very important aspect in the whole autonomy part. So there, I mean, I can use physics-based models where I model the aerodynamics of the vehicle and of the rotor, of the wing, and based on that, I try to estimate how the vehicle is going to behave. But it becomes very complicated. You see, I mean, there are times when I'm actually looking at maneuvers where my helicopter is flying upside down, or I am looking at a hybrid vehicle, which is sometimes like a quadrotor, and other times it is actually like a biplane airplane. So the physics-based model, and it's going to do transition also. So the physics-based models become tricky. So other options are, I can have data-driven models. I can do system identification. If I have already a flying vehicle, I can do system identification and extract plant dynamics from that. But I may not have this luxury all the time. If I'm making a new UAV, which nobody has ever made, I don't have any data available with me. So then, I mean, this becomes somewhat redundant, not very useful. And then, I mean, there could be AI-based black box models also, which requires data, flight test data primarily. So sometimes, I mean, one can generate flight data also. I mean, this test data through simulations, but I mean, I don't see much merit in doing that. So the physics-based models suffer from limited capability. There could be error in estimation of physical characteristics and parameters. There could be unmodeled components and dynamics. So all those things are there. So there is always possibility of using AI and all for data-based improvement. In physics-based model, I will give you some examples. I can do real-time execution on GPU computers. I can do high-fidelity simulation of aggressive flights, like this kind of flights, by using such augmented models, which has some physics and some AI also. Sorry, I mean, there's some message.
Please carry on. Some person is trolling that PPT is not visible, but it is visible from my end. Maybe they have some network issue.
Maybe you can try rejoining. Yeah, all right. So right. So this, I mean, AI and all the things also adds to the whole scheme of things and gives you a lot of possibilities and a lot of advantages in using that. So here's an example of that. Okay, so there is experimental data, which is this shaky blue line, okay, and then there is this dashed line, and there is a red line. So red line is a simple baseline model based on purely physics. A lot of times we see it is deviating significantly, okay, from what we see in experiments. So here, I mean, with a physics-based model, but augmented with some AI-based learning, okay, that can give slightly better results here. Okay. On the other hand, I mean, with a more deep learning kind of approach, okay, we see that, I mean, we get much better accuracy. So here you see a 10-second simulation where the helicopter is doing some maneuver. You see a lot of different rates it's generating, okay, and its velocity is also changing significantly. We still are able to capture the basic behavior very, very well with a very simple, I mean, not very detailed deep learning model. Okay, this kind of accuracy can be enhanced. They are all work done by our past students. Okay. You can do even the advanced controls. I mean, of course, Dr. Kothari will talk more about controls, but I thought just I'll touch upon this because I was talking this. So if you are doing some, because these works were actually done by my students mostly. Yeah. I mean, yeah, inverted flight, I mean, me and Dr. Kothari, we did it together. Yeah. So there are things like, I mean, this auto rotation maneuver where, I mean, the helicopter engine is shut off and it comes down and lands automatically, or it does this inverted flying or this kind of maneuver like TikTok, okay, where a helicopter does this three-dimensional flying. Okay. So these aggressive maneuvers can be done by, I mean, originally it was done by this Peter Beal at Stanford. Okay. He did purely using AI, but we could replicate all these things actually by doing more conventional control and more conventional flight mechanics there. So that's what we did. I'll show you some videos of that, I mean, in a moment. Additional things like, I mean, see, the advantage of doing simulation is that eventually you can set up what is called hardware in the loop simulator. So if you have a good flight dynamic model, okay, instead of testing your autopilot, your control algorithms on the real vehicle, where you run the risk of crashing the vehicle, breaking the vehicle, and causing damage, the easier way is that, I mean, if I have a good flight dynamic model, I can set up the whole thing in the actually simulation and test out my controllers, test out my autopilots, even without having to build or touch the vehicle. Yeah. So all this can be done very, very accurately and precisely using hardware in the loop simulation. So this is another domain where a lot of work is going on. We have done some work. IIT Bombay, the Professor Hemendra Arya, he does a lot of work in this area. Yeah. And we also do we have done some work in this domain as well. Yeah. Here is a physical setup of what is this hills. So you have a computer for visual display, you have a computer for looking at the flight parameters, and you have a real-time computer which will run the flight dynamic model in real time. You have the hardware being tested, which is the autopilot. You also have actuators in the loop, and you can actually sense the motion of the actuators. to sort of include the delays which are there in actual actuators. So that way, I mean, you can, with effort, you can actually make it very, very comprehensive. And this actually, this whole HILS is actually a very powerful tool to test larger systems, okay, and very, very important thing to carry out design of controllers and many other tests actually. All kinds of systems can be tested using HILS without actually taking any risk at all. So here is some example of some of the applications of this advanced flight mechanic model. So accurate flight dynamic modeling, and you see helicopter flying upside down, then will flip back up. Okay, so this is being done by the autopilot. Okay, there's no human involved in the loop here. And all this is actually being done through geometric control and accurate flight dynamic modeling. Again, flying upside down by the roll axis. Then you will see it flip back up. Okay. It will do a barrel roll kind of thing, where it will do full 360-degree spin, okay, for the helicopter. So we were first people to do, I mean, our team was first people to do this kind of work globally, because nobody had done it, I mean, using conventional physics-based approaches and so on. Right, so the sort of thing maneuvers here. Here we'll see the thing about this auto rotation, okay, where I will switch off the engine of the helicopter. So normally you would imagine if I turn off the engine, it will just crash and land, right? I mean, or rather crash land. Okay. It will come down on the ground crashing, but that doesn't happen. Okay. So with our controller and control algorithm, okay. So with our control algorithm, it automatically sort of senses how high it is, okay, and at what speed it is coming back. So this is actually something which is inherent in the helicopters. Okay. Even manned helicopters do this, what is called auto rotation. I mean, if there is an engine failure, tail rotor failure, or transmission failure, okay, the pilot actually lands the helicopter without any power manually by doing auto rotation. So here we have done that without a pilot. Okay. The autopilot automatically takes care of that. So this makes your vehicle very safe. So if you are operating this helicopter and suddenly your engine shuts off because of some malfunction, okay, just like my computer shut off, I mean, without giving me any warning, right? And I was kicked out of the meeting. But in this case, I mean, now my helicopter lands in a controlled and safe manner. So all that actually was done through these HILS and flight dynamic modeling and everything. Then there is a lot of work in perception area and using AI. I mean, I just thought I'll quickly also talk about AI and applications. So for enhanced autonomy, a lot of image processing work is going on, video processing work is going on, which all fits into. So if I can have a system where, I mean, I can determine all these buildings, how far they are, I mean, my UAV would ensure it will not crash with this. Yeah. So here you see, I mean, example where all this is getting detected, and from that detection, I mean, the UAV is planning its path by avoiding the obstacles and so on. So in computer vision, there is a lot of work going on, a lot of application, face detection tracking, action recognition, detection of objects. Because now UAVs, I mean, people want that, okay, a UAV should be able to detect and tell you that, okay, there is a human being, or there is a dog, or there is some person carrying a gun. Okay. So all those things are already desired and demanded by users. Object tracking, path planning, obstacle detection and avoidance, navigation in GPS denied environment. So all those things are there which one can work on. Okay. Here's an example of object detection done by one of our colleagues. It's a standard thing, a lot of people do it, I mean, but he does it in a very optimal manner. Okay. Okay. And I mean, challenge is that none of these are actually foolproof. I mean, nothing will work all the time. Okay. So sometimes these algorithms will miss certain things. It may have some errors also in time. Okay. So you see, I mean, the butterflies are flying across, but I mean, the algorithm cannot detect butterflies, of course. Okay. So some of these techniques were used by Dr. Kothari and his team. So I just showing this. I don't know if he will show this video or not, but I thought I will show it. But I'm talking about design and other things. So in this case, I mean, Dr. Kothari and Dr. Sahu from electrical, their team actually achieved this interesting work of landing a UAV, a new kind of UAV with tiltable propellers, land on a moving platform. So first they did it actually on indoors using a ground robot, and in circular path. Then they did outdoor testing where it actually landed on a moving jeep. Okay. So it's tracking. Okay. So it's tracking the jeep with the marker. Okay. And then once you command it to land, it is now going to land. Okay. This is work done by a joint PhD student between Dr. Mangal Kothari and Dr. Soumyaranjan Sahu. Okay. So in the car in the back, Dr. Kothari who is following the jeep actually. Okay. Yeah, another work by Dr. Kothari's team on ground bots for obstacle detection avoidance. So here they are using some LiDAR sensors to detect the obstacles in real time and planning the path and trajectory across these obstacles and so on. Okay. Now, I mean, to work in this kind of area, so the topics I talked about, I mean, if you want to work, you need some knowledge of aerodynamics, some knowledge of dynamics and flight dynamics. But if you want to work in the area of control and AI, you should have basic knowledge of aerodynamics and flight dynamics, sensor fusion, estimation, control, autonomous navigation, deep learning, AI. These are the domain which you need to be experienced in. Tools typically would require would be MATLAB, Python, OpenCV, C++, ROS. So Dr. Kothari may probably talk about this because he does a lot of work with ROS. ROS is a robotic operating system. Then there is a sort of a software loop simulator called Gazebo, very popular, very useful. And then finally, you have to do some hardware validation through experiments, either through hills or through real flight testing and so on. Yeah. Okay, so that brings to the last element, which I have now 4 or 5 slides left. I think I'm pretty much on time. So now, I mean, we do design, we do autonomy, but finally we have to manufacture these and make these UAVs. So, and how do we go about making this? So what are the different manufacturing techniques which are involved? Again, people from manufacturing background, they may already know all this, but nevertheless, there would be other people who may be interested to know this. So normally, I mean, these UAVs actually have metal parts, plastic parts, or composite parts. So metal parts, I mean, I can do 3D printing, but it's very expensive. I would rather go with traditional machining using lathe, milling machine, CNC, etc. To create a design drawing and give it to the manufacturer. He will manufacture it and give it to you. You may have to give him right tolerances to ensure that, I mean, your parts actually meet your requirements. Plastic parts, very popular approach is to do 3D printing, but 3D printing is often very slow. So it could be okay for prototyping and initial testing. But if I want to do at large scale production, then I could do injection molding. Okay, that is the approach. It will give you bulk volumes and large volumes. Fiber reinforced composites. Okay. These are very, very popular, very common. Okay. These composite structures could be of different kinds. I mean, it could be monocoque structures where it's a hollow structure. Okay. And the skin takes all the load. Okay. That is a monocoque structure. Could be semi-monocoque structure where, I mean, there is a hollow skin, but the skin doesn't take all the load. It takes only some shear and some torsion. The rest of the load is taken by the skeleton structure inside, consisting of frames and bulkheads and longerons, and so it's a sort of a skeletal structure made up of either carbon fiber things or your balsa wood for small UAVs, or even metal, aluminum alloy, etc. For small UAVs, one very common manufacturing approach is to make sandwich structures. So you have foam core and covered with carbon fiber or glass fiber cloth. So I'll talk about some of that in coming slides. Advanced materials are such as PEEK, is polyether ether ketone, or there could be plastic with carbon fiber embedded inside that. Some of this gives you very extraordinary properties, very, very good properties. So this could be again used for UAVs. Because here, I mean, loads are less. Now, one important aspect, I mean, because I did not touch upon the structural aspects where you have to consider the load factor to design the structure itself, I directly jump to the manufacturing part. So there, I mean, when you are doing simulations to check the strength requirement of the material and the design chosen, there you can consider a factor of safety of 1.25. For manned aerial vehicles, we use factor of safety of 1.5. Here we'll do 1.25. So whatever design loads you expect, you apply those loads, but multiply it with 1.25 and then check that the structure actually remains intact. Okay? It should not have any abnormal deformation, should not have any stress concentration and internal failures and so on. Okay, so you should check for measure stresses and all those things. Okay. So here's an example. Okay, if I have a simple metal part, I just make a drawing like this, detailed, and give it to the manufacturer. He will do the fabrication. I'll give him 3-view drawings in whatever format he wants, and I get the part. So this is, I mean, simple conventional machining. I mean, nothing new about that. But when you come to the plastic components, 3D printers give you a lot of advantage. Lot of variety of material can be used. There are different types of 3D printers also. Common types which are readily available, very cheap. I mean, you can buy 3D printers from Amazon, and if in your lab you don't have one, you must buy. It costs only 15,000-16,000 rupees. You'll immediately get you started by printing motor mounts and simple things like that. You can even print the whole airframe like this. These are okay with, not very strong, but with certain exceptions. It could be strong if you use some proprietary material like nylon with carbon nanoparticles and so on. SLS gives you good properties where you do laser sintering. So in this, I mean, again, layer by layer thing is done, but each layer is sort of fused using what you call laser. This powder material is there, and from that you create everything. These are expensive. Machines are very, very expensive. Runs in crores often. Recently, some cheaper versions have come out, but yeah, they're not as good as the more expensive ones probably. Third type is the jet fusion, which HP has introduced. They give almost like SLS kind of finish, but isotropic properties. But properties would be similar to plastic. You cannot embed things inside that, what you can do in FDM. So they are different depending on the type of strength requirements. You can choose the technique you want to use. All of them will give you similar, I mean, performance more or less. Yeah. Then there is a wide variation in properties depending on the quality of raw material, atmospheric condition, etc. So one has to be careful while using these. Yeah. And one has to characterize the property of the materials that you are using to be sure that, I mean, the loads you are applying, it will be able to withstand. Injection molding is method which is used for making large volume plastic propellers, gears, adapters, etc. Okay. But this is for production, not for normal day-to-day research and development. Okay. Composites. Okay. These are the most widely used components, and this has huge application in this domain. So, like I mentioned, monocoque, semi-monocoque, or sandwich structures, which are very popular. Manufacturing can be done using autoclave, which is an expensive device where you apply known pressure and temperature-based curing is done. But then for UAVs, I mean, one can easily use out-of-autoclave methods like vacuum bagging, where you cure at room temperature. You can use compression molds also and cure it in oven. Give you very good result, almost as good as autoclave. You can do hand layer at room temperature curing. So steps are: you make CAD model. Using the CAD model of the part, do the mold design, manufacture the mold either using wood or using metal or like aluminum or something, or you use glass fiber to make the mold. So select the material for this, then do the weight layer, or use pre-peg layer, and then once the thing is cured, either at the room temperature or at some curing in the oven, finally do the finishing. So here is some example of how we have made some of these components. So this is an example of how we are making the wings using this sandwich method. So this foam core is cut using a CNC, hot wire CNC, which we have built in-house in our lab. Then you can use carbon fiber cloth or Spretto or whatever, and with that, so this entire thing, the box and everything is made of carbon fiber, all fabricated here at IIT Kanpur. So for making this hollow box, we had to make the mold like this, and there will be a plug. With the plug and this mold, we'll finally get this kind of things, which after finishing will come out like this. And this wings have been made using this foam, cut foam, and then doing hand layup with vacuum bag. Sometimes we also make this structure, semi-component structure, using molds. So these molds can even be made using 3D printing. So this is a 3D printed mold, saves you money instead of making a metal mold, which will be quite expensive. And using that, I can easily make this kind of skins, which is used for making the fuselage of an aerial vehicle. For example, this fuselage here, we could make using this particular technique here. The finished spot plane. Here. Last few minutes, so I just try to wrap up. In this case, I mean, one of my master student actually tried to replace this aluminum made component, which is made by conventional aluminum machining, with a 3D printed component. Now this is aluminum. Okay? So we want to replace aluminum with this. What is this? This is actually a holder of blade for my helicopter. So this holder is supposed to take 3 kilonewtons of load. Okay, in operating condition. So 3000 newtons it's supposed to take. So is it possible for a plastic part to handle so much of load? Not normally, but with a special design where we embed carbon fiber inside this material, I can actually do that. And you see, I get some weight saving. 46 grams to 26 grams, quite significant. I mean, I would say, simply because each gram saved for an aerial vehicle means additional flight time or additional payload lifting capability. So, but these materials still have to be characterized. And quantified before you can start using it routinely. But in this case, we tried this and we could successfully achieve that. Yes, we could prove that I can design a component. Okay. To do all this, we first characterize the material itself. We made this kind of coupons, 3D printed these coupons with a different number of layers of carbon fiber embedded inside this onyx material, and tested the plain onyx in UTM and got the material characteristic properly done. Did some FEM simulations for different number of layers and of fiber and everything, and did a very careful simulation. And we finally found that yes, it is possible to design structure which will actually be able to withstand this kind of load easily. And then we finally took it back to the UTM, applied the load, and we found that yes, the system could actually handle this kind of load and not break. So this is what we could do. So that brings me to the final part where I just quickly show you that using all these methods and techniques, we have designed various different UAVs. Pretty much every design, every kind of concept which is out there. Fixed wing, rotary wing, tandem rotor helicopter with front and back rotors, single rotor helicopter, quad rotor engine helicopter, or quad rotor with the engine, coaxial rotor helicopter, which you saw in the beginning also. With biplane tail seaters, we have made of many different kinds, and some of our very, very different innovations we brought in. So here you see biplane tail seater where you can swivel. Your both wings can actually change their orientation with respect to each other, and it takes off and turns by 90 degrees. Then we have this dissimilar coaxial, which is invented by many students, a completely new design. So we have 8 to 9 patents actually on different UAV design concepts. We are also working on swarm and that kind of problems where multiple UAVs can be controlled in a uniform and monolithic manner. Then here is one application where we use a helicopter to catch a rogue drone. So this UAV can even be used for counter UAV application, and counter UAV is becoming a huge market in itself, big area. So if you have a drone which is unwanted, we can take a helicopter or some such thing, a big UAV, which will capture this drone and bring it down. So you'll see it will bring it down, it will bring it close to ground and then release it. So the corridor is dropped.
It's a manual or it's automatic, sir?
Right now it is manual. We are seeking funding to make this fully autonomous. All this will be done automatically. It will have a net throwing system and all these things. So the idea is very clear. We have done some background work, but to develop it fully, we need funding. And we are waiting for a center funding to come our way to be able to do this. Then GPS denied kind of work has also been done, which we did for Mitsubishi Heavy Industries Japan for some their industrial use. Here is a video of this biplane tail seater. We talked so much about that, so I thought we'll see the video. Now it is actually developed as a product, not this one. This is actually still a student prototype, but we are now selling this actually for delivery of vaccines in remote area. So it's now a complete solution which has been developed. It can carry 5 kg payload over a distance of 5 to 7 kg payload actually, over a distance of 30-40 kilometers.
So 30 to 40 kilometers one way, or it's a return back also?
One way.
One way.
So then you have to replace the battery, then you will come back. Or you go 20 kilometers and come back.
Sir, 10,000 mAh battery you are using or higher batteries?
No, it's much higher. So it is close to, I mean, also depends on
Sir, it's
number of
very
cells.
stable. Yeah,
Sorry?
it looks very stable. It looks very
No,
stable.
It is very stable. It is very, very stable actually. This is still an experimental one. The final one is actually even better than this. And it can fly very high speeds also. It can do 120 kilometers per hour easily.
Sir, right now the ICML is also called for the
Yes.
same type of proposal. I think.
So, I mean, people who are qualified in that, they are already approaching us to buy our UAV.
Oh, that's great. Sir.
Yes.
Great,
So, I mean, we already have orders for this from those people. Yes.
And sir, what is the cost of this one? Approximate.
That vehicle, final one, I mean, it is going to cost of the order of 10 to 11 lakhs, something like that. Yeah. With
That's
everything
great.
included. Yes.
It's also not very high.
So, I mean, this is a very unique solution, and it's still, I mean, industrial grade. Defense products are very, very expensive. This is still manageable over a long run because it can do, I mean, these all components are replaceable easily and repairable. It is very good life. So anyway, so I mean, in this view, just I wanted to show you how quickly it back transitions. So even at high speed, it will transition back to hover and come down and land very easily. So Dr. Kothari will talk in detail about the whole controller design for this. Here is a video of this swiveling biplane tail seater. So this is a very unique design which my PhD student came up with. So initially there was no bearing in between and there was resonance. So later on we added this swivel bearing. Afterwards it can actually fly nicely. So you can see it doing different maneuvers, pitch response, then roll response, and so on. Then it do your response. And then finally forward flight. It takes off like a normal multi-rotor the way you saw in the previous video. And then whole vehicle transitions into biplane airplane. So very simple design. You see, it doesn't have any fixed wing control surface. No ailerons, no elevators, no moving parts. Very, very simple and very unique design. Okay, so that's this. Now, this is a short video of our Chinook helicopter, that is tandem rotor helicopter, front and back rotors. This was designed for an American competition where we were in the top 3 teams and we could make this in 3 months' time from scratch. So it's a very complex system. You can see the whole transmission, everything, structure, everything was designed here. Blades we bought off the shelf and rotor components we bought off the shelf, but other things we could make very quickly. So this can lift 10 kg payload. So that is all. That was our final slide. So now we have another 15-20 minutes for any discussion.
Thank you very much, sir, for your very interesting and very nice talk. And now, participant, you may ask the questions, please. Sir, few of the questions from my side. So first, I'm taking my own questions. Sir, in the high altitude, when the air density will be low, then small drones will be fly or not? What is your opinion?
Absolutely. There is no problem with that. The problem happens for engine-based vehicles, not so much for electrical vehicles. So engine-based vehicles, your engine power output degrades because there is no air. Air is less, so you cannot have proper combustion, so your power will degrade as a function of density, called the lapse rate. Right?
So simple, right.
Yeah, so for electrical vehicles, that problem is not there. The only thing is that you have to operate with higher pitch propellers. That is
okay. All. Okay. And sir, second thing is, suppose we are using the hybrid drones. That means we are using engine and one of our students is involved in one kind of startup in which they are using the engine to be generate the power and feed to the batteries. So, what is your opinion? It is a quite good idea, or we have to be do some kind of the hybrid in term of
So what happens? No, I mean, what happens in the hybrid concept is that you directly power the rotors with the generator. You are not charging the battery. Okay. Okay, because I mean, battery which is there on board is only very small battery, which is only for emergency use.
Okay,
If your
rest we
generator
have to
shuts off,
directly.
yeah, if your generator shuts off, then I mean your system should have enough power to be able to come down and land safely. Yeah. Yeah. So,
one is-
but the challenge is that I mean, for smaller UAVs, it is not very useful.
Right.
Because what happens, I mean, your generator weight will be around 5-6 kgs, your engine weight is another 5 kgs. So I'll give you a comparison. Okay. There is this Chinese website called Foxtech, which sells these 2 kilowatt generators, which a lot of people use for their drones. In India, most people use that only at many places. So this entire drone can lift 5 kg payload, and the all-up weight of this vehicle is 25 kilograms, because of generator, engine, fuel, everything. Now this huge vehicle will travel very, very slowly. It can maximum go at 40 kilometers per hour. If you compare same vehicle with my helicopter can lift also 5 kilogram payload. Its total weight is 13.5 kilograms. And it can fly at 100 kilometers per hour very easily.
Oh.
And it can also fly continuously for 1 hour or more. So it becomes smaller, lighter, compact, and this hybrid will have advantage when you go to larger scales, much bigger scales.
Sir, what design you have shown in this two flaps you are going to be connected. So, what is your idea after the vertical takeoff? It will go straight like that, or
yes,
this
yes.
is
So it goes like this, and both the wings can still move like this.
Yeah. I think you, sir, you have got the patent for that.
Actually, there was one goof up on the part of the student. He actually uploaded a paper online in which all the details were there. So Indian patent cannot be filed on that.
Oh, sir, I think this thing is looks very interesting to me. So, lot of questions with
it is
sir,
very
lot of
yeah.
Sir, if the time, sir, if the corona will permit, of course, I will be really interested to visit your lab.
I mean, you are always welcome whenever you want. So, yeah, I mean, of course, not in the corona time. I don't want to do this.
After the corona, hopefully.
So there are some.
Please, Ujjwal Shah, please ask your question.
Yes, ask something like maximum height that can be covered here.
Yeah, please.
It's a very common question everybody asks, but maximum height over ground level or over, I mean.
Yes, sir. Maximum height from the ground level means in hilly areas, mountain areas like Ooty,
So hilly areas, you don't talk about from ground level, you talk about from sea level. So there are two things.
Okay,
one thing is called your AGL, above ground level. So as per DGCA rules, you cannot fly a UAV over 100 meters above ground level anywhere. But you can launch them from higher altitudes. So if you go to Leh, so our helicopter we have flown in Leh also at 11,500 feet, but with a reduced lifting capacity. So I cannot lift 5 kilograms there. I can lift only 2 kilograms there probably. Then we also flew our electric helicopter at 14,500 feet. But electric helicopter doesn't have much problem. I can still fly at, and even I can probably fly at 16,000 feet also. No issues. So, I mean, electric vehicles don't have any problem. You can go to any height, no issues. Battery-based vehicles would have problem. But yes, I mean, if I go to 18,000, 20,000 feet, my air density is so low that you may have to plan for that. You may have to have a larger rotor and maybe higher pitch control or something, because when the density is too low, you don't have much scope to lift. That is the only challenge. Otherwise, I mean, no problem.
Or sir, one more question. Means if the UAV is struck by some foreign particles, then what should be the steps to recover this one? Means how we can minimize the risk of the striking.
Right. So no, risk of striking we cannot minimize. Okay. I mean, normally birds will stay away from this. Okay, because the rotors make a lot of noise. Okay. So birds are intelligent beings. They stay away from it. Okay. Also, I mean, unlike airplanes, I mean, which are huge, they cannot avoid them, and they sometimes end up colliding, which also happens very rarely. But I mean, normally birds will not come close to it because it's very noisy and so on. Okay. But still, I mean, there can be a malfunction. There can be some other incidents. I mean, your
Yes,
motor
sir,
may
yes.
fail, your ESC may fail, your battery may die suddenly, okay, your engine may break down. Some failure can happen. Okay. So that's where, I mean, the safety becomes very, very important. So just, I mean, I think a week or 10 days back, I actually made a presentation to ICAT regarding how, because they talk about safety and regulations and so on, regarding how you can make UAVs safer. So you saw one example in our helicopter. My helicopter already had this advanced autopilot in two manners. Okay. You saw a helicopter flying upside down. Okay. Now there is no fun in just making a helicopter fly upside down. Okay. There is a requirement for that. If I am flying my helicopter in mountainous areas, there are a lot of winds. And this wind can make my helicopter go upside down. Okay. It can just toss it around because it happens to full manned airplanes. I have talked to helicopter pilots. They say, I mean, the wind is so strong that, I mean, you cannot do anything. Okay. It will just move you around here and there. Okay. Nothing can be done. So if something like that happens, my autopilot will still be able to recover my vehicle and bring it back to normal orientation. Okay. So there won't be a control failure. So you have robust control. Other aspect is that, I mean, like auto rotation. My helicopter, even if my engine is off, as long as I have my battery power available, it will still come down in a controlled manner, as if it is coming down with a parachute. So the landing speed of my helicopter in auto rotation is 0.1 meter per second. So it's coming as gently as you can see. For multi-rotor drones, okay, I have an interesting video. Let me see if I can pull it out quickly, then I can show you. So in that, actually, yeah, I mean, normally multi-rotor people, what they do is they put a parachute. Okay. If there is a failure, automatically you trigger parachute release and it is captured and it comes down. Okay. But downside is that you are adding weight, okay, which may not be very, very useful. And I mean, if I can do it in a more clever manner, it will be better. Okay. Yeah, I found that presentation. So let me just show you that particular slide, okay, which could. Okay, I don't have it here. Okay. Sorry. Okay, I mean, I don't have that. I mean, maybe I'll show it later, okay, or something. So that is another way. Third way is that actually I have redundant actuators. Okay. So instead of having 2 ailerons, I have 4 ailerons. Okay. Instead of having 2 elevators, I have 4 elevators, or I have double actuators. So the servo motors, there are actually dual redundant actuators available, which has 2 motors inside. So if one motor fails, automatically the other motor will take over. But the downside is it will be very expensive. These are military grade components. They are very expensive. So I can show you one picture, maybe after the recording stops, okay? Because that is a proprietary thing. I don't want to show it here actually. Okay? So I mean, other option is that, I mean, I use a larger number of motors, like instead of 4, I use 8. Okay. So what happens, I mean, if